Hello, and welcome back to Scrum Master course. Now let's take a closer look at the processes and how they work. You probably remember hearing that a project has a product backlog of prioritized requirements, as well as a product owner who is responsible for prioritizing these requirements. Now the question is, how do you get this work done? First of all, let's define the Scrum processes in general. Scrum processes address the specific activities and flow of a Scrum project. In total, there are 19 processes, which are grouped into 5 phases. These phases are presented in chapters 8 through 12 of the SBOT guide. These 5 phases describe each process in detail, including the associated inputs, tools, and outputs. Also, in each process, some inputs, tools, and outputs are designated as mandatory, while others are designated as optional. The decision to include any optional input, tool, and/or output depends on the particular project, organization, or industry. Inputs and outputs denoted as mandatory are important for the successful implementation of Scrum in any organization. Next, we'll take a closer look at the phases and the processes enlisted under them. Initiate is the first phase, and the processes carried out as part of Initiate are as follows. Create project vision is the first process performed. In this process, the project business case is reviewed to create a project vision statement that will serve as the inspiration and provide focus for the entire project. The product owner is identified in this process. Identify Scrum Master and business stakeholders is the second process, during which the Scrum Master is identified using specific selection criteria. Form Scrum Team is the third process in the Initiate phase. In this process, Scrum team members are identified. Normally, the product owner has the primary responsibility of selecting team members, but he or she often chooses the team in collaboration with the Scrum Master. The fourth process is Develop Epics. In this process, the project vision statement serves as the basis for developing epics, which are large, unrefined user stories. User group meetings may be held to develop epics. Create a prioritized product backlog is the next process. In this process, epics are refined and elaborated, then prioritized to create a prioritized product backlog for the project. The done criteria is also established at this point. The last process classified under the Initiate phase is Conduct Release Planning. In this process, the Scrum core team reviews the user stories in the prioritized product backlog to develop a release planning schedule, which is essentially a phased deployment schedule that can be shared with the project stakeholders. The second phase we're going to learn is Plan and Estimate, and these are processes grouped under this phase. First is Create User Stories. We can see that in this process, user stories and their related user story acceptance criteria are created. User stories are usually written by the product owner and are designed to ensure that the customer's requirements are clearly depicted and can be fully understood by all the stakeholders. User story writing exercises may be held. This involves Scrum team members creating the user stories. User stories are incorporated into the prioritized product backlog.
The next process is Estimate User Stories. In this process, the Scrum team, supported by the Scrum Master, estimates the user stories and identifies the effort required to develop the functionality described in each user story. Next, Commit User Stories. In this process, the Scrum team commits to deliver product owner-approved user stories for a sprint. The results of this process are the committed user stories and the sprint backlog. And the next process is Identify Tasks. In this process, the committed user stories are broken down into specific tasks and compiled into a task list. Next is Estimate Tasks. In this optional process, the Scrum core team estimates the effort required to accomplish each task in the task list. And the last process in this phase is Update Sprint Backlog. In this process, the Scrum core team updates the sprint backlog with further details about the tasks as part of the sprint planning meeting.
The third phase we'll discuss in this module is Implement. Let's now look at the various processes listed to be carried out during this phase. The first process in the implement phase is create deliverables. In this process, the Scrum team works on the tasks in the sprint backlog to create sprint deliverables. A Scrum board is often used to track the work and activities being carried out. Issues or problems being faced by the Scrum team could be updated in an impediment log. The second process performed is conduct daily stand-up. Every day, a highly focused, time-boxed meeting is conducted, which is called the daily stand-up meeting. This is the forum for the Scrum team to update each other on their progress and any impediments they may be facing. The last process conducted during the implement phase is prioritized product backlog. In this process, the prioritized product backlog is continuously updated and maintained. A prioritized product backlog review meeting may be held, in which any changes or updates to the backlog are discussed and incorporated into the prioritized product backlog as appropriate. The next phase is review and retrospect. There are three main processes that take place during this phase. The first one is demonstrate and validate sprint. In this process, the Scrum team demonstrates the sprint deliverables to the product owner and to the relevant stakeholders in a sprint review meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to secure approval and acceptance of the product or service by the product owner. The last process performed in the review and retrospect phase is retrospect sprint. In this process, the Scrum Master and Scrum team meet to discuss the lessons learned throughout the sprint. This information is documented as lessons learned, which can be applied to future sprints. Often, as a result of this discussion, there may be agreed actionable improvements or updated Scrum guidance body recommendations.
The last phase is release. There are two main processes performed in this phase. The first one is ship deliverables. In this process, all deliverables from accepted user stories of previously completed sprints are delivered or transitioned to the relevant business stakeholders. A formal working deliverables agreement documents the successful completion of the release. Retrospect release. In this process, which completes a release, business stakeholders and Scrum core team members assemble to reflect on the release and identify, document, and internalize the lessons learned. Often, these lessons lead to the documentation of agreed actionable improvements to be implemented in future projects. This brings us to the end of the segment. Thank you for learning with us.